Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of ModGear. This week, I'm driving the Mazda RX-7, a JDM legend with, surprisingly enough, one of the strangest engines ever made. So, let's get into it, shall we? But before we begin this week's episode, let's take a step back in the past for a brief history lesson. Our story on the RX-7 begins in 1978 to 1980. At the time, lead designer of Mazda, I'm not even going to proper pronouncing that name, I'm terribly sorry, but I completely butchered it. Anyway, the lead designer of Mazda at the time announced the RX-7 in Japan, and it was originally supposed to be a replacement for the current Savannah RX-3. And it was supposed to join its brothers in Mazda's current lineup, the Mazda Luce, or the Luce, however you pronounce it, and the Mazda Cosmo. The car itself was a pretty awesome car to drive, and since it was smaller than most engines, it definitely made it for a quite enjoyable experience. And it also consumed less gas, and it was affordable. But what engine am I talking about? That engine is the 13B Rotary. Maybe not the 13B, but just the Rotary engine. Rather than using piston compressions, like in most normal cars that you see today, the RX-7, along with many other cars that Mazda and maybe some other manufacturers in the late and early 19th century used, the RX-7 used the same idea, but instead everything moves on a triangle. Or a Dorito, for short. Second generation, Savannah RX-7 used that same rotary engine, making around 200 horsepower-ish. Many quality of life improvements were added, and tuners nowadays really like this particular model of the vehicle. And finally, and the most famous of all the generations of RX-7s, is the third generation. The car in the 1997 model year, I believe it might be 97, don't quote me on that, the car got a significant redesign and a power boost, making around 250 horsepower, with later models pushing around 270. It was lighter, nimble in the corners, and for how light it was, weighing somewhere around 2,700 to 3,500 pounds, depending on the model you chose, it was surprisingly quick. As of today, the RX-7 is now known for its sound, backfires, and of course, its legendary 13B rotary engine. An engine of which, surprisingly enough, hardly any mechanics know how to work on them. If you're going to own one of these cars, prepare to break some apex seals, because, those things break constantly. And you don't want to bring it to a mechanic since no one knows how to work on them. Since as of 2012 and after the production of the RX-8, no manufacturer basically on the planet now makes rotary engines in modern day cars. But anyway, that was actually kind of a short history lesson, but we're just going to roll with it. But anyway, with that history lesson out of the way, we can get to this week's video. Take it away, Panda. Thank you, Mr. History Panda. And with that, we can begin today's tests, starting with the top speed test. Welcome to the Genesis 1 mile dragway. It's a place where many cars come to push their engines, and, well, their speed, to their limit, simply to put their speed onto the boards. Let's see how the RX-7 can do in this test. The RX-7, or FD, RX-7, whatever you want to call it, topped out at 81.8 miles per hour. But the car, after some more testing, could definitely keep accelerating higher and higher, if only it had a longer runway. But for now, 81.8 is going to be our benchmark, but you can definitely go faster, but just not at a very fast rate. Next up is the breakingly strange brake test. The goal of this test is very simple. The car will deploy both its front and rear brakes once it passes this white line. The goal is to not hit the parked Nissan Leaf, and if you do, you want to measure your distance based on how far the Nissan Leaf gets moved from its parking spot. It's pretty self-explanatory. So let's see how the RX-7 can do in this test. To confirm, the RX-7 does have slippery brakes, so therefore, braking earlier is going to be very normal, and it's going to be a must. It's an okay attempt from the RX-7. Next up is the cornering test, and to do that, I've come here. This is the Forksville Test Circuit. Developed by the ModGear development team, it's used to help test cars on tight corners, through tight bends and jumps, to help further prove the idea of how cornering works on a track-focused setting. So let's see how the RX-7 can do in this test. Surprisingly enough, the RX-7 does pretty well here. It goes through corners rather very smoothly and gets a solid run on the straights. However, one of the biggest things I noticed was that body roll was a very big thing that this car struggles with, and a slight slippery feeling in the tires makes it so that going around a corner too hard can cause a spin out. It's not going to cause a spin out every time, but you're going to get very close to getting there. But these are mainly my weak points, so a pretty good solid run from the RX-7. Next up is the parkingly fun parallel park test. The goal of this test is very simple. We want to park in between these two parked Renault Meganes, and we want to make sure that there's enough room both in the front of the car and the back for someone to walk through. So let's see how well the RX-7 can do in this test. And with ease, the RX-7 passes this test. Next up is everyone's favorite, the gravel road segment. This test is used to help test the car's ride condition on day-to-day conditions, whether this be bumpy roads, potholes, or just slippery roads as a whole. You get my point. So let's see how the RX-7 can do in day-to-day conditions. The RX-7 did, well, it didn't do great during this test. It is very, very bumpy. You're going to feel pretty much every bump, similar in a sense to how the Skyline from last week's episode compared. In fact, there was actually sparks coming off the rear end of this car when it hit the ground on one part of this test. So definitely not a good run from the RX-7. Next up is, well, quite the very basic bump test. The bump test is used to help test a car's endurance on standard bumps, whether this be speed bumps, bumps in roads, or bumps on a track, these kind of things. We want to see how well car's suspension travels so that, you're not going to destroy your front end. So let's see how well the RX-7 can do in the bump test. Similar to the previous test, the RX-7 didn't really do well here. The rear end of the car was constantly slamming the ground on these bumps, and the drive just pretty much felt terrible. A very, very unfortunate run from the RX-7. Next up is the nauseous-inducing slalom test. The slalom test, as mentioned in the cornering test, is used to help judge a car's body roll and a loss of speed through cornering, to see how well they can compare on the track when raced. We already know a little bit more as to how the RX-7 performs in tests like this, but we're going to see how it performs in a true slalom test. So let's see how well the car can do. Surprisingly enough, the RX-7's tight turning radius helps it do pretty well on this test. But again, body roll and a loss of speed are still very noticeable in this test, and it's going to be one of this car's weak points. But still, a good attempt either way for the RX-7. The MPG figures this car has are, I guess you could say, alright, with an average of 18 miles per gallon in the city and 24 on the highway. This is for the automatic model, if you're, a loser, but the manual version of this car runs somewhere around 17 city and 25 highway. However, how do these figures apply on the track? And now, let's give the Mazda RX-7 an official lap around the Futaro circuit. The official standard time is 2:17:41. With added up accidents and collisions, the final adjusted time is 2:19:41.
Yo, what's up?
God fucking damn it!
Bring me that Doritos!
Mountain Dews,
Please!
I got you, fam!
Let's do this! Oh shit! Oh shit! Oh, what the fuck? Stop breaking the law, asshole!
The fuck?
fuck is this?
Oh shit, 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 oh shit!
The fuck is this?
I don't give a fuck.
No, 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 no!
Punch!
Give me your fucking money!
Okie dokie.
Well, shit.
Run.
Oh, no fucking way.
Bring me that gas!
Terrorists win.
I got you, fam!
Thank you.
Stop breaking the law, asshole!
Oh, come on!
So, what are my final thoughts on the Mazda RX-7? This car is very great in the corners, aside from its body roll, fortunately. Its speed is definitely questionable at the least, and its ride practically kinda sucks. If you're taking this out on a weekend car, then yes. Or just any kind of daily for like light tasks, say gas, grocery stores, this kind of thing, then yes, the RX-7's a pretty okay car. But it's not going to be something made for full-on daily use. However, if you can actually find you can actually pretty much find affordable RX-7s, since there's quite a few of them, and they sell for a little bit less than Supers and Skylines, but again, you're still going to have to pay a little bit, because again, these things are still pretty valuable. But with that, it's time to end. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next week. Good night.